Hello everyone, Stepan here. I'll continue the series on the French defense with what I consider to be one of the most fun variations to play, and it occurs from the classical French defense. So after e4, e6, d4, d5, knight to c3 is the classical or the Paulsen variation. Black replies with knight to f6. He doesn't play the Wiener variation or something else. He goes for the classical reply. This is continuation of the classical variation of the French. And in this position, white plays pawn to e5, chasing the knight away. And this is now the Steinitz variation of the French defense. And this is, I would say, the most popular way for white to approach the classical French defense. Now, once again, if you are unfamiliar with the basic theory of the French defense and you lack knowledge and common plans for both sides, as well as an easy walkthrough through other variations, I will link the videos in the description below. I have made separate videos on almost every other variation of the French and on the basic introduction as well. In this video, we are going to focus only on the Steinitz. Now, of course, with this move, with pawn to e5, white is expanding in the center, chasing the knight away, but he is also creating two weaknesses. And if you are familiar with the pawn structure in the French defense, this is the most common setup for both sides. And if you remove all the pieces from the board, you are going to be able to highlight the common problems and plans for both sides. Once again, you can see that in the introductory video. But here, it's already clear that black has two pawn breaks. One of them is c5, one of them is f6, and that he is going to aim to achieve at least one of them, if not both. First of all, of course, black has to move the knight away, and there's only one move. Up until move 7, both sides really only have one move, which is the best and the only option. So knight f to d7 is played. You could try knight to e4 as a pawn sacrifice, but it would just be bad and almost immediately losing. Every other square is taken, except for coming back to g8, but that doesn't really make any sense. So knight to d7 is the move. First of all, the knight has a clear purpose on d7. It's supporting both c5 and f6, the two pawn breaks for black. So the knight is actually optimally placed on d7. It's much better placed than on f6. And now, to gain counterplay, since black has a very clear plan of breaking with either c5 or f6, white has to do what's the best plan for him in this position and in almost every variation of the French defense, and that's to expand on the king side and start an attack. So white plays f4. This is the only move in the position, and black immediately strikes with c5. So both sides are trying to get enough counterplay, enough initiative, enough attack on one side of on the board. Black is attacking on the queen side, white is doing the same thing on the king side. And if you remember the pawn chain rule, you should always attack in the direction your pawn chain is facing. So it's logical that white is attacking the king side and that black is attacking the queen side, and your pawns support your attack. Now from this position on, white plays knight to f3, black responds with knight to c6, and white plays bishop to e3. So these are the forced moves, I would say. Of course, white had to play bishop to d3 to support the d4 pawn, and this is the main weakness in white's position. If you remember the Tarrasch French or some other variation of the French defense, where white is able to play c3 supporting the pawn, he doesn't have that many problems, but in many variations of the classical, in fact in all variations of the classical, d4 is the main target for black, and conversely the e6 pawn is the main target for white to attack, because this pawn is often weak, especially after the move f6 or f5. So e6 is black's main weakness, d4 is white's main weakness, and structurally and positionally, black of course has the bad French defense bishop to deal with, and in the Steinitz variation, the most common plan to develop the bishop will be either to b7 or to a6. So that's a thing you have to remember first of all. This is how you resolve the issue of the bishop. If you don't remember the theory, if you don't remember exactly what you have to do, always try to play b6, bishop b7, or bishop to a6, and try to trade it for this bishop. Now from this position on, you could say that the Steinitz variation, which is also called Boleslavsky in some lines, and this is in fact the Boleslavsky variation of the Steinitz variation, but whatever you play basically from move 7 on will be the Boleslavsky Steinitz, but it's commonly known only as the Steinitz variation. There are 4 moves black could play here, and this is where the variation branches out, and this is where black gets to decide which variation will be played, which is one of the biggest advantages of the Steinitz for black. Even though black can't choose to enter the Steinitz because white has to play e5, after you enter the Steinitz, black is the one who will be deciding what's going to be played. There are 4 moves. The first move and the most common one is pawn to a6, and pawn to a6 is the simplest main line. I would say that it's not the most fighting way. C takes d4 is the second line after bishop to e3. The third one is bishop to e7, which is, even though it might look passive, a very aggressive way for black to play, and it sets up a nice trap. And the last one is queen to b6, which is, it's a very forcing line, so if you don't want to remember a lot of theory, this would be the move to choose. But let's go over each one in detail. First of all, after bishop to e3, a6 is the main line. Now what a6 is doing is preparing to fianchetto the bishop. It's preparing to expand with b5 without the pawn being loose, of course, and it's preparing to gain space on the queen side, which is, as we said already, the most common plan for black in many French defense positions and in the Steinitz as well. Now, after pawn to a6, white has one good move, which is queen to d2. And this is preparing castling queenside in some positions, even though it's not the most common plan, but it's supporting the center and it's preparing rook to d1 if nothing else, and it's a developing move. Now all white has to do is develop the bishop, castle, and he has finished development, while at the same time black still has 2 pieces to develop, and the queen is stuck on the bank rank as well. And first of all, this bishop doesn't even have a single square. So after queen to d2, black has to play b5. This is by far the best move and perhaps the only active move black could play. White will respond with either a3 or d takes c5. Now both moves are quite different. What b5 is doing, of course, it's expanding on the queen side. And now, if you are white, you might be thinking that black has 2 threats, c4 and b4, which is in fact true. And d takes c5 is designed to stop c4, a3 is designed to partially stop b4, but none of the moves really do their tasks perfectly, and black has a lot of chances. Let's go over a3 first. Now after a3, black will have to play queen to b6, which is supporting the c5 pawn. It's also preparing to push with b4, which is now defended sufficiently, and it's activating the queen finishing development. So after this move, knight to e2 will be played, anticipating the move b4, which is actually the best move for white is knight to e2. And after queen to c7, which is now anticipating white's next move, which is c3, solidifying d4. The position has seemingly calmed down, and black has lost a lot of initiative on the queen side, but that's really not true. At some point you are going to be able to play cd, you are going to be able to play bishop to b7 or bishop to a6, rook to c8, bishop to e7, place it on this diagonal, castle kingside, play f6, and gain some space and attacking chances, while at the same time white has given up. White has told you everything you need to know on the queen side, and this structure is fairly easy to attack and to strike at. Now, of course, you can play a5, b4. You can then provoke the move dc, and after bishop takes, knight takes, you will have a clear target in the b3 square, and once you get your knight to b3, this will be a perfect outpost. Already you can see that it's forking 2 pieces at the moment, so white is going to have to react. So white doesn't really have such a comfortable way of avoiding your advance on the king side, on the queen side, I'm sorry. Now the second option, we just went over a3. The second option, if white doesn't play a3, is d takes c5. Now this move is simply resolving the tension in the center immediately, but it's giving black a free hand, and I think this variation is strategically almost winning for black. Now let's go over the most common moves. Now here you play bishop takes c5. This is the best way to play. Bishop c5, knight to c5, queen to f2 is the best move for white, attacking the knight, and you play queen to b6. And the engines will tell you that in this position black is already slightly better, and as the moves go on, the advantage will actually increase, because it's very hard for white to decide where to put his king, and wherever he puts his king, it will be much less safe than black's king. Now from this position, bishop to d3 is the most common move. Of course, black could take the bishop here, the queen isn't hanging because taking the bishop is with check, but it doesn't really do much because white wants to reinforce d4 and plays the c2 pawn on d4, and this would allow him to do that. So this is not a good idea for black. Don't take the bishop. b4 is the best line, chasing the knight away, and after knight to e2 you play a5, and you have expanded a lot on the queen side, which is clearly visible, and you have a lot more initiative than white. Now white will most commonly castle, bishop to a6, trading your bad bishop for white's good bishop. King to h1 is the best move, unpinning the king, and after knight to e7, let's say rook a to d1. This is the normal position from the Steinitz after the move a6, and if on move 9 white doesn't play a3, and I think this position is much better for black. I can turn on the engine so you can see for yourself. You can see the evaluation bar on the right side of the board, and this is minus 0.5, so black has a slight edge, which is a very good thing on move 15, 16, so I think this is a great line for black to face. And remember that after a6, if you choose to play a6, the first deviation white could go for is after queen to d2, b5. He doesn't play a3, but he plays d takes c5. So remember that this position is good for black. You take with the bishop, bishop takes, knight takes, queen to f2 will most commonly be played, queen to b6, and you are great in this line. After bishop to d3, remember not to take the bishop, but play b4, chase the knight away. So this would be the most common line after bishop to e3 for black to play a6. Now let's go over three sidelines, even though they are played almost equally frequently. So okay, c takes d4 is the second most commonly played move for black. So c takes d4 is simply resolving the central tension immediately. Now white is going to play knight takes d4, and you will play bishop to c5, not taking the knight, but putting on more pressure on it. And if black ever takes on c6 and you play b takes c6, your d pawn is reinforced and you have a lot more central control, so this would be much better for black. White's most common move is queen to d2, and after black castles kingside, white is going to castle queenside, and this is I would say one of the best variations to play, and this will almost certainly always be a lot of fun because of opposite side castling and a lot of attacking chances for both sides. Now you play a6 here, which is preventing either knight from coming to b5, and of course preparing b5, bishop to b7, which is the main plan in the Steinitz variation to resolve the bishop. Now white has two moves. The first one is queen to f2, simply putting on more pressure on your bishop and reinforcing the knight, preparing the move f5, preparing the move g4, g5, and simply crushing you on the king side. So to this you will react with bishop takes d4, b5, expanding, bishop to d3 will be played, b4, knight to e2, a5, and let's say king to b1 would be the best line. And black is almost completely winning in this position. So remember that after queen to f2, which does attack on the king side, you have to play actively. Give up your bishop pair, because your knight is supporting a lot more key squares in the position. Bishop takes d4, b5, you are preparing to chase the knight away. And now after bishop to d3, b4, knight to e2, a5, your plan will be whatever white does, you're going to trade the bishop, which is white's best attacking piece in this position and your worst attacking piece. After you do that, you're going to play queen to b6, rook f to c8, you're going to transfer this rook to c6, and you are going to crush white. And I think the highest rated game from this position, let me just check, there's one game by Varuzan Akobian, Andrei Volokitin, Buman Rainer, so players with white will most commonly not enter this position because it's unfavorable for them, but if you are black, you can provoke this position very often, because on move 10 white is going to castle queenside, and this is the most common plan. And after a6, if white plays queen to f2, the engines will tell you that the position is equal, but after the most logical sequence of moves, white has a clear disadvantage, and his attack is not fast enough. And this resembles some not structurally, but because of the advantages, some dragon positions in which one side is simply slower than the other, and the side which is faster in the attack usually wins. Now the second most common move after a6 for white is to play h4, and I think this move is much better because it doesn't waste time with queen to f2. It's simply pushing kingside pawns immediately and putting a lot of pressure on black's position. Now this pawn on h4 is already creating a lot of pressure in black's position, and black is already slightly uncomfortable because he isn't sure what white is going to do. If the move g4 comes now, then f5, you have clear problems in the position. So black has to resolve the central tension and trade off some pieces. So knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, b5 now, starting a counter attack. Rook to h3 will be played sometimes, which is a very active move. Now b4, knight to a4, bishop takes d4, let's say this, queen takes d4. Now once again the engines will tell you that black has a slight edge, that black has equalized and in fact stands a little better. But the point of that is, the reason for that is that the knight is misplaced on a4 really, and the only move to defend it is b3. But white has great practical chances. Now you can immediately see that it's pretty hard to trade off the bishop because your pawn is on a6. So after white plays bishop to d3, rook to g3 or g4 rook to g3 and starts an attack, you're going to have a very hard time defending this line. So I think that after castles on move 10, a6, if white plays queen to f2, black is better. If white plays h4, white is better. But the engine will tell you that it's equal or better for black in both positions. But the engines don't have pressure humans do during the game when your opponent starts attacking menacingly. Okay, so this was after bishop to e3, a6, c takes d4, the second most common move for black. Now let's go over bishop to e7. This is the third move. Now the first moves are queen to d2 and castles. These are the best moves for both sides. Now, most commonly, white will fall into a trap here, which isn't a one-move trap, it isn't a tactical trick, but it's castling queenside for white. And even though this move looks very tempting, it's immediately losing, and I have actually faced this move a couple of times in my own games, and not in tournament games, but in blitz and online games. And it's actually not clear how white is losing immediately, but once black plays c4, white really has nothing to do. His position is just much worse. The best move here is king to b1, in fact. And after king to b1, you can either play rook to b8 or you can play b5 immediately, sacrificing a pawn, and you hope that white is going to take. After knight takes b5, rook to b8, knight to c3, queen to b6, you can see that this position is just busted. For white, if you turn on the engine, it's +2. It's -2, I'm sorry. The position is completely lost. So after bishop to e7, queen to d2 and castling, white can't castle queenside. This is just a bad move. So white plays bishop to e2. And after bishop to e2, b6 will be played by black. You have to develop your bishop, either bishop b7 or bishop a6, trading off your bad bishop. Castles, and black here plays f6. Now this is where, this is I would say the most classical variation of the Steinitz, in which you can see the thematic breaks for black and the thematic plans for white, in which the e6 pawn is the main weakness in black's camp, the d4 pawn is the main weakness in white's camp. So after f6, white's best try is d takes c5, knight takes c5, rook a to d1, bishop to b7, developing your bishop on this diagonal. Now you always have tactical tricks of d4, attacking this pawn. Let's say after queen to e1, queen to g6, this will be a strong tactical threat. Now queen to e1, queen to e8, I'm sorry, queen to e1 by white, trying to get into the attack here, and you can play several moves here. Now, the move f5 isn't that good for black, I would say, because you are closing down your options along the f-file. I think the best move here is f takes e5, even though the engines will tell you white stands slightly better. After the move f takes e5, black has great practical chances. You can immediately see that the e5 pawn is weak and isolated, you can easily target it. You have a great outpost on the e4 square once this knight gets dislodged, and you can do that easily. And you can even double up on the e5 pawn immediately and pressure it, and it's not clear how white is going to defend. You also have a plan of playing queen to c7, provoking some weaknesses around this diagonal and attacking white. So even though the engines will tell you that it's slightly better for white, I think black stands okay. If you turn on the engine, it's +0.2, so nothing major in fact. Okay, so this was the move bishop to e7. Just remember that after bishop e7, queen to d2 and castling, white can't castle queenside. If you are playing this position with white, don't be tempted. Just develop normally, castle kingside and attack the e6 pawn. This is your plan. If you are black, prepare f6 and start an attack in the center and on the queenside. Okay, the last move after bishop to e3, a6, the last good move for black, even though in this position, after bishop to e3, black could play rook to b8 or b6 or move 7. I think those moves are slightly dubious, and the last logical move for black is queen to b6. This is the fourth option black would choose on move 7. Now this line is pretty forced, and there's only I think it's a straightforward line with only one move for both sides up until move 20, and the first side that deviates from the theory is going to be slightly worse, and it's actually a very unforgiving variation. After this move, knight to a4 should be played by white. And now queen to a5, c3, c takes d4, b4. And here, black is supposed to be better, and he's supposed to be better after sacrificing a piece, so you should go for this sacrifice. This has been played, I think, in the US Championship just a few weeks ago. I'm going to find the game. So now you play knight takes b4, c takes b4, bishop takes b4 check. You have of course given up a piece, but it's for 2 pawns. It's for 3 pawns, so it's nothing that devastating. The material is equal. And white is going to play bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. You're going to castle. And now after bishop to d3, white is supposed to have equalized, and you hadn't justified your piece sacrifice significantly enough. But I think that black has great practical chances. Firstly, because this pawn is now actually becoming defendable. This knight is clearly misplaced on the a4 square, and it doesn't really have any good squares. And black is going to develop the bishop easily because the queen is supporting the a6 square. And I think black has a great position here, especially after f6 or f5, closing down the center or opening it up. Black is going to have great attacking chances. Now, from this position on, the best move is supposed to be b6. And b6 is supposed to give black equality. However, the most commonly played move is b5, which is gaining a tempo on the knight. But this move is supposed to be much better for white, and this is now the advantage has gone up from 0.3 to 1.4. And even though this move has been played by some top grandmasters, the engines will tell you that it's just bad. Now, the highest rated game from this position was Sergei Karyakin, Andreikin Dmitry, and Dmitry actually won. Karyakin was playing with the white pieces. So Dmitry Andreikin managed to defeat Sergei Karyakin with this move. At the time, Sergei was 2760. It was in 2010. So practically speaking, this move does give you a lot of chances. But if your opponent is going to be theoretically prepared, and if your opponent is going to be looking at this position with an engine, he will most probably find a way to punish you. I'll just show you the line, how it goes. Now knight to b2 should be played by white. Knight to b6, reinforcing the center. Castles. Knight to c4. And this is where white has to go for something radical, because if, of course, the knight is now hanging on b2, and if white takes and you take with the d pawn, this position is just winning for black, and those 3 connected pawns, 2 of which are passed, are completely winning. So white only has one move to keep his advantage, and that's bishop takes h7. Now, as black, you should take king takes, queen to h5, king to g8, knight to f3, preparing to get into the g5 square and checkmate. You play g6, queen to h6, and queen to c7 is your only move. Now, if from this position on, white plays knight to g5, black is winning. If white doesn't play knight to g5, white is supposed to be winning. The best move is knight to d3. And after knight to d3, you can see the evaluation on the right side of the board. It's about 1.2 for white. However, after the move queen to c7, if white plays knight to g5, the position is equal or slightly better for black, because you have the move f6. After f6, queen takes g6, queen to g7, he has to take, because if he doesn't, you are going to take the knight. Queen takes g7, king takes g7, now this position is -1 for black. E takes f6 is the best move for white, and in this position you shouldn't be taking the pawn. The best move is king to g6, simply because you are preparing the move e5, and weakening the defense of this knight. And if you play, let's say, if you play, I'm sorry, rook takes f6 first, and then you try to play e5 and weakening the knight, it gives white a lot more options. And especially if after e takes f6 you take with the king, then if you play e5, f takes e5, king takes knight, then rook takes rook is winning for white, of course. That's why in this position you play you play king to g6. Okay, these were the 4 moves. I hope I didn't go into too much detail, and I hope you managed to understand something. So let's go over the basics. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, the classical French defense. e5 is starting the Steinitz variation. Now the following moves are forced up until move 7, knight f to d7. Of course, you have to get away from the attack, and support f6, support c5. f4, white is attacking on the king side. c5, black is doing the same thing on the queen side. Knight to f3, knight c6, bishop to e3, and now black gets to choose to play either a6, c takes d4, bishop to e7, or queen to b6. Okay, in the description below, once again, you can see the video on the basics and the introduction to the French defense. You can see the videos about all the other major variations of the French. And I will also link the timings to each separate variation in this video, so you can find them more easily. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you got something from this video, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye!